1300 consists of 9 different modules. In the first section of this course, Chapter 1, we are going to discuss Introduction to Programming. For those of you who have not done any programming whatsoever, there are some terminologies that we are going to discuss in here, like procedures, modules, conditional statements, and so forth. Also, Module 2 talks about responding to the user action. That talks about basically event-driven programming. For example, you have a form, you have a button on it, you want to click on it and do something. We learn how to do these things. Event-driven programming concept allows us to go and basically work with control objects and write message handler and event handler for those commands. And basically we can launch our code anytime somebody performs an action, and we respond to those actions. Module 3 talks about validation. Validating data is important. The first step in order to prevent an error from occurring is to prevent a wrong data to be transferred to the computer program. So in order to validate the data, there are a variety of different techniques that we can use. One of the techniques here is to do the masking. Like for example, if you're not supposed to receive a character, you only accept numerical value, you have to make sure that you only accept numerical value. Or even though you receive a numerical value, if you're expecting a particular range, you have to check to see if the value that is coming to you is fit within that range. So the concept of validation really gets into detailed explanation of it. In this chapter, we talk about like control level validation versus form level validation. Maybe you have like 50 different controls inside of a form, and then you don't want to do validation for every single one of them. You might want to have one validation for the entire form. So by the time somebody clicks OK, or they want to save the entire form, you just do the validation for all of them. Most websites actually using that technique. Also, Chapter 4 talks about functions and understanding the scope of it. The difference between a sub-procedure and function procedure is that function procedure returns a result back to you. You could actually use a particular action in your application and create a function out of it and pass parameters to it and have the function to do something for you and return the value back to you. And you can take advantage of that function and use it. The beauty of function is that you can use it within any expression rather than sub-procedure that you can just call it. But function procedures could be used in any expression. You could actually use it in a conditional statements. Also, you could understand how to debug your application using debugging tools. In Module 5, we are talking about how to fix the errors, because errors will occur no matter how good of a programmer you become by time, but still you're human and you might make mistake. And even though you are not going to make a mistake, your application might depend on other pieces of code. And those code or those specific logical components might not be available at runtime. So you might throw some problems or exceptions or errors in general, and you need to know exactly how to find the errors and basically fix them. There are some errors like syntax errors that basically the compiler don't even let you run. Those are easy to find. But there are some logical errors. What would you feel if you were missing a zero on your paycheck, logically? Well, basically, you can't afford that, so you have to make sure where the problem is. So basically, debugging tools will give you the capability in order to fix that. Of course, handling runtime errors, again, despite the fact you have debugging tools to fix them, but still runtime errors occur based on a specific condition. Maybe you are communicating with another database somewhere, and that database is not available. And then, the system comes and says the database is not available, and your system will crash. Well, as a professional programmer, you need to basically fix those errors. You need to handle them. Because if you don't handle them, someone else will handle it for you, the operating system. You know how it handles it? It terminates your application because you caused the problem. But if you handle it, then operating system says, good job, you're handling your own problem, so I don't have to do anything for you. Like anything else in life. So handling the errors will be discussed in this section of the course in Chapter 6. Then you need to talk about repeated action. Like you want to repeat certain things. We talk about looping structures. Do you know how many times you want to repeat, or you don't know how many times you want to repeat? Well, there are two different styles for it. We are going to discuss that. If you have been doing programming, well, there is the same concept for all languages anyways. And then, of course, the chapter 8 is the most beautiful section for many of the designers in Access database, working with records. Because after all, Access is a database, and somehow you have to start dealing with records, not necessarily dealing with the data that you're receiving from the user account, or end user, perhaps. ADO, or Active Data Object, will be discussed in chapter 8, and I'll spend quite of time in order to explain the object model of ADO. If you learn chapter 8 in this class, you basically are on a road for any other language, VB, C++, anything. ADO is common language for all different languages. Chapter 9 talks about how to finalize your application, and that means creating a set of application. And basically that set of application will allow you to run the application and install it in many different locations. Let's say on your development station, you have already done your work, and now what you want to do, you want to create a package, and that package could be installed in any other locations. At the end of that also, sometimes you don't want to give the access and rights to other users to come to your Access program and change something. So you could actually create an executable of Access, so no one can ever go to the code. They can only work with it. At the same time, maybe they don't have Office installed on their computer, but you want to redistribute Access anyways. So you only and only combine your Access program with the runtime library in order to just be able to execute Access, not necessarily have Access program to be installed on it. So these are the topics that we're going to go through.